Welcome to Crisis in Perception, a series where we explore the ideas, systems, and psychological forces that shape how we understand the world. In each deep dive, we examine one book in depth, tracing its arguments, insights, and real-world implications. The goal isn't just to summarize, but to connect the dots to see how these ideas influence our thinking, our behavior, and the society we live in.
And today we are diving deep into a truly disruptive idea. It's one that challenges one of society's most comfortable assumptions, the belief that high intelligence is, a guarantee of sound judgment.
In this deep dive, we explore The Intelligence Trap by David Robson. And this book, it fundamentally redefines what smart even means. If you've ever watched a brilliant colleague make a catastrophic strategic error or, seen a highly credentialed expert fall for an obvious scam, this is your essential guide to understanding why.
Our mission here is to synthesize the extensive research that proves intelligence and academic expertise don't just fail to protect us from errors. In many cases, they often make us more vulnerable to predictable, irrational mistakes.
So we're going to explore some of the shocking case studies that ground this paradox.
Yeah, and we'll identify the psychological mechanisms at play and, most crucially, reveal the evidence-based mental qualities like, say, rationality, humility, and active open-mindedness. These things predict better decision-making far more reliably than a high IQ score.
We're really looking for the shortcut to being truly well-informed, which, it turns out, starts with understanding our own cognitive blind spots.
It really goes.
Okay, let's unpack this central contradiction, because Robson doesn't pull any punches. He starts with the paradox of genius, embodied by a scientist whose intellectual life was a high-wire act between groundbreaking brilliance and, well, outright dangerous delusion.
We begin with Kary Mullis, a figure who really encapsulates the entire thesis of the intelligence trap. His genius, as you mentioned, is beyond dispute. In 1983, he invented the polymerase chain reaction PCR. It's a technique that is now just fundamental to modern molecular biology. It was a stroke of absolute raw brilliance.
I remember reading that his discovery was so seminal that you can effectively split biological research into before Mullis and after Mullis. Without PCR, the Human Genome Project is impossible. Forensic science is set back decades.
Modern medicine loses a core diagnostic tool. It's huge. He won the Nobel Prize for it. His capacity for abstract, complex thought was, clearly astonishing.
It was.
But what makes Mullis such a crucial case study is that if you turn from his lab notes to his memoirs and public commentary, you find an equally astonishing capacity for irrationality, dogma, and just bizarre fringe beliefs.
Okay, like what?
For instance, he claimed that he had a personal encounter with extraterrestrial life near the Navarro River in California. He said it was a being that took the form of a glowing raccoon with shifty black eyes.
A glowing raccoon.
A glowing raccoon.
Yeah.
He suspected alien abduction, even though his memory was mostly blank after the initial encounter.
That sounds like a quirky anecdote, maybe the eccentricity of a genius. But his irrationality wasn't just benign, was it? It became destructive when he applied it to his own field.
Precisely. That's the key. He was a dedicated follower of astrology, aggressively defending it against what he called the narrow-mindedness of the scientific establishment. But the real danger lay in his denialism concerning universally accepted scientific facts.
You mean things like AIDS?
Yeah. Mullis became a loud, unwavering voice denying that AIDS is caused by the HIV virus. He also claimed that the entire theory of ozone depletion caused by CFCs was a conspiracy cooked up by scientists purely for financial gain.
So we have a man whose intellect allowed him to crack the code of DNA replication, a profoundly subtle and complex process. Yet he simultaneously accepted the logic of glowing raccoons and rejected mountains of data about HIV. This is the core thesis, isn't it? Could his high intelligence have also made him profoundly vulnerable to predictable stupidity?
That's the question. We assume intelligence acts as a firewall against these errors. The logic is, if you can master molecular biology, you should surely be protected from common cognitive errors.
But the research shows the opposite.
The research shows that high intelligence and academic education not only fail to protect us, but may make us more vulnerable to specific kinds of foolish thinking. This is where we get into the mechanics of the trap at the individual level.
It sounds like intelligence is less a protective armor and more a sophisticated weapon that can be turned against the user. What are these flawed mental habits that smart people fall into?
The primary mechanism is what psychologists call motivated reasoning. High intelligence grants superior mental resources for one specific task, justifying what you already believe, especially if that belief is central to your identity or personal comfort.
So when faced with contradictory evidence, an average person might just get confused or dismiss it.
Right. But an intelligent person, however, is perfectly equipped to construct elaborate, intellectually complex, and often convoluted counterarguments to defend their initial position.
Which means they aren't arguing their way to the truth, they're arguing their way out of recognizing an error.
Exactly. And the result is that they become significantly more dogmatic in their views. I mean, if you have spent 5 years building a brilliant, complex rationale for why you know better than the rest of the scientific community, as Mullis did, you become deeply entrenched.
Why would you listen to someone else? From your perspective, their argument is less intellectually rigorous than the fortress you've already built in your own mind.
And that leads directly to the second trap, overconfidence. If your internal logic feels ironclad, you're just less likely to seek advice or even acknowledge the possibility of being wrong.
That's the link.
That overconfidence leads to the most crucial cognitive blind spot, the bias blind spot. This is the common phenomenon where we easily recognize logical holes in your rationalities and other people's thinking. It's easy to spot Mullis's flaws, but we fail entirely to see them in our own.
And what's surprising is that smart people don't just have this blind spot.
They show a bigger bias blind spot. Their intelligence helps them brilliantly critique the world, but it provides them with excellent cover for their own errors.
So the intelligence enables the critique of others, but simultaneously fuels the arrogance that prevents self-critique. If this intellectual elite is consistently falling into this trap, the stakes are enormous, extending far beyond one Nobel laureate's strange beliefs.
The consequences are measured in catastrophic failures across society. We see miscarriages of justice, massive corporate bankruptcies, public health failures. Consider medicine. Studies show that as many as 15% of all hospital diagnoses are wrong, killing more people annually than breast cancer.
And these aren't usually due to a lack of medical knowledge.
No, not at all. They arise from the flawed mental habits anchoring on an initial diagnosis, motivated reasoning to justify it, or overconfidence that can accompany that expertise.
It sounds like the underlying engine for all of this is what researchers call cognitive miserliness. Even if you have the brain power of a rocket scientist, you still default to using mental shortcuts, System 1, fast, intuitive thinking, simply because it's easier.
That's spot on. Intelligence provides the capability for rigorous, slow, System 2 analytical thought, but it doesn't guarantee the disposition or the will to use it. If a quick, intuitive answer feels right, or if using deep analytical thought requires you to confront an uncomfortable truth about yourself, your brain defaults to the efficient, comfortable path.
And the smarter you are, the more convincing your mental shortcut feels.
Exactly.
To really drive home how destructive this dogmatism can be, let's move from the contradictory genius of Mullis to the historical example of Thomas Edison. Here's a man who arguably lit up the modern world, yet his brilliance was poisoned by a crippling inability to change his mind.
Edison, with over 1,000 patents, was the ultimate embodiment of Yankee ingenuity. But the story of the Battle of the Currents is a tragic historical case study. It's the sunk cost fallacy married to devastating motivated reasoning. Edison championed his direct current, or DC, which required power stations every few miles and was hugely inefficient.
And his rival, George Westinghouse, introduced alternating current, or AC, which could be cheaply and efficiently transmitted over long distances using transformers. Objectively, AC was the only feasible path for mass electrification.
A rational innovator would have adapted, recognizing the superiority of the new technology. But Edison had invested massive amounts of money, time, and critically his ego into DC. This entrenched commitment, the sunk cost effect, meant his brilliant mind was entirely deployed to justify his position. He refused to concede.
And he even dismissed his own engineer, Nikola Tesla, who was working on early AC concepts.
He refused to pay him, forcing Tesla to defect to Westinghouse. It was an astonishing failure of vision.
But it got worse than that, didn't it?
Oh, much worse. Edison's motivated reasoning didn't stop at professional stubbornness. It became outright macabre. He engaged in a bitter public relations war against AC, desperate to associate it with danger.
I remember reading about those gruesome demonstrations he staged.
Yes, he publicly electrocuted stray dogs and horses using AC current, attempting to terrify the public into rejecting Westinghouse's system. And perhaps the most shocking moral sacrifice was his involvement in developing the electric chair.
He claimed to oppose capital punishment.
He did. But he advised on the invention of the electric chair for New York courts, insisting it use AC power purely in a cynical, futile attempt to brand AC as the death current.
He used his profound intellect and influence to execute animals and create a new method of human execution simply to defend a financially and technically obsolete system.
That's the sobering takeaway. His inability to adapt was not due to a lack of raw brain power. It was due to the intelligence trap. Cognitive errors persuaded his brilliant mind to double down on a disastrous pass long after the facts were undeniable.
The story of Edison shows us that raw ability means little if it's used to justify your ego. This brings us to the question of measurement. If high intelligence doesn't prevent these failures, why did society put so much faith in IQ tests for so long?
We can trace much of that confusion back to Lewis Terman, who popularized the IQ test in America in the early 20th century. Terman believed that the traits measured vocabulary, abstract reasoning, memory represented a single, innate, raw brain power that predicted everything: academic success, professional success, even moral character.
And he bet his career on this idea, tracking his group of over 1,500 gifted children, the termites, for decades, convinced that a high IQ score was destiny.
But the flaw was present at the test's very inception. Alfred Binet, the French psychologist who created the original test, warned against Terman's narrow interpretation.
Right, Binet protested the brutal pessimism of defining a child's entire future by a single score. He argued that mental worth was far too amorphous to be captured on one scale.
Exactly. Terman's test measured analytical ability, but it fundamentally failed to capture judgment, rationality, and wisdom.
And Terman's own life, tragically, showed the intelligence trap in action. His high IQ was no protection against the very flaws he sought to measure.
That's right. His passionate, lifelong conviction about the genetic nature of intelligence fueled significant motivated reasoning. For instance, he openly advocated for eugenics, joining the Human Betterment Foundation, which promoted compulsory sterilization.
And his conviction was so strong that it compromised his scientific method in the termite study.
Completely. He often offered financial support and glowing recommendations to his subjects, unconsciously skewing the results and undermining the very objectivity he claimed to uphold. His intellect provided a strong rationale for deep-seated prejudice, allowing him to easily dismiss the intellectual potential of entire demographic groups based on limited, biased data.
So after all that effort, what was the actual verdict on the termites? Did that stratospheric IQ guarantee stratospheric success?
The results were far more complicated than Terman hoped. While the group was, on average, successful, a vast number failed to fulfill their ambitions. A later analysis focused on the 26 brightest termites, those with IQs over 180. Critically, he found they were only marginally more successful than peers who scored 30 to 40 points lower.
So high IQ guarantees opportunity, but not necessarily distinction.
Or wisdom, or even long-term satisfaction.
If IQ is a flawed, narrow predictor of wise decisions, what does the research show we should be measuring instead? This is where Keith Stanovich introduces the term disrationalia.
Disrationalia describes that critical mismatch. Having high analytical ability, like a great SAT score, but simultaneously showing poor performance on new tests of rationality. It's being analytically smart, but practically foolish. And this isn't just an intuitive feeling. The evidence is pervasive.
The circumstantial evidence is certainly entertaining. I mean, we hear that 44% of Mensa members believe in astrology and 56% believe Earth was visited by extraterrestrials.
Right, but Stanovich brought the scientific rigor. His experiments showed a strikingly weak correlation between traditional IQ scores and performance on tests designed to measure common biases. The correlation for susceptibility to biases like anchoring and framing hovered around a meager 0.1 to 0.19.
That's almost nothing.
And the sunk cost bias showed almost no correlation at all. Even highly trained experts in logic, like philosophers with PhDs, proved just as vulnerable to framing effects as the general population.
That's a powerful indictment of the narrowness of the IQ test. It measures mental horsepower, but not the driver.
That's an excellent analogy. Stanovich therefore developed the rationality quotient, or RQ. This quotient captures a more general tendency for thoughtful, reflective, and careful consideration, the disposition to use your intelligence correctly.
And the correlation between IQ and RQ?
It's modest, around 0.47. That gap is the fertile ground for the intelligence trap. You can have immense horsepower, IQ, but lack the necessary mindware, the knowledge, attitudes, and willingness to drive it safely and effectively.
So to truly cultivate successful adaptive thinking, we need to broaden our definition of intelligence. This is the goal of Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence.
Sternberg recognized that life's success requires more than just analytical intelligence, which is what Terman measured. He expanded the definition into three interconnected components: analytical, creative, and practical intelligence.
Let's look at the two components often ignored by traditional testing, starting with creative intelligence. What does Sternberg mean by that?
Creative intelligence is the ability to invent, imagine, and use what's called counterfactual thinking. It's essential for innovation and problem solving because it allows you to step outside the current reality.
So a test for this wouldn't ask you to recall a fact.
No, it would ask you to exercise imagination using facts you already know. For example, describe what the world would look like today if Germany had won the Second World War. Or describe what a bee can see that you cannot.
That forces the mind to actively synthesize knowledge into a new, original structure, rather than just recognizing a pattern.
Exactly. It promotes intellectual flexibility. Then there is practical intelligence, which is arguably the most critical component for real-world success. Practical intelligence is the ability to plan, execute ideas, and overcome messy, complex problems. It includes deploying tacit knowledge, the unspoken skills that come from experience, as well as crucial metacognition.
Which is the ability to judge your own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. And the source material gives a perfect example of this non-academic intelligence in action with the termite Shelley Smith Mydans.
Mydans, despite being a termite, actually dropped out of Stanford.
She did, yet during World War II, she and her husband were captured and held in a Japanese prison camp. Her practical intelligence, her quick thinking, social adeptness, and ability to improvise solutions was instrumental in navigating their escape and survival. Her formal, analytical intelligence might have been high, but it was her practical skills, learned outside the classroom, that saved her life.
And Sternberg's research showed that developing these broader skills wasn't just theoretically useful, it had tangible, measurable results.
Absolutely. When children were taught to develop their practical and creative intelligence, they showed greater overall learning gains. And get this, Sternberg developed an alternative university entrance exam that combined traditional SAT scores with measures of practical and creative intelligence. This new combined metric was roughly twice as accurate at predicting a student's final GPA than the SAT score alone.
Twice as accurate.
And practical intelligence was also shown to be a far better predictor of military leadership performance than general intelligence. This suggests that if we select for analytical ability alone, we are consistently choosing people who are prone to making catastrophic, rigid, Edison-like errors.
That's a powerful argument for redefining what smart truly means. Let's shift now to the cognitive science behind how this poor reasoning happens. Let's start by returning to motivated reasoning, especially in areas where emotions and identity are heavily involved.
Motivated reasoning, as we discussed, is the intellectual process of using superior intelligence opportunistically. It's a defense mechanism. Instead of seeking objective truth, your intellectual capacity is deployed to promote your interests or protect beliefs central to your identity.
Dan Kahan's research on numeracy and politics offers a particularly clear and frankly chilling example of this.
Kahan demonstrated that people with greater numerical literacy were far more likely to get a statistical problem right, only if the calculated outcome supported their pre-existing political identity. He presented participants with the same statistical data, but framed it in two different contexts. One where the data appeared to support the efficacy of a gun control policy, and one where the data appeared to support the opposite.
So the math itself was identical, only the label changed.
Exactly. When the math suggested a gun ban was ineffective, highly numerate conservatives suddenly became significantly better at solving the statistical problem correctly. When the math suggested a gun ban was effective, highly numerate liberals showed the same sharp spike in performance.
So what was the key finding?
The key finding was that the most numerate participants were 45% more likely to read data correctly if it conformed to their expectations. Their intellectual skill wasn't used to assess the evidence. It was deployed only when needed to defend their side.
It sounds like superior intelligence just makes you a highly skilled, highly efficient lawyer for your existing views.
That's the perfect summation. It's intelligence used for propaganda rather than truth. Another classic example is Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes, the epitome of the perfect reasoning and observing machine.
Exactly. And he was created by a man completely bound by motivated reasoning. Conan Doyle was famously devoted to spiritualism, especially later in life.
That emotional motivation was the key, wasn't it? His belief in life after death, coupled with his significant social and financial investment in the spiritualist community, provided an identity-defining reason not to question the evidence.
So his Sherlock Holmes-level creative thinking was deployed solely to explain away skeptical findings. He saw exactly what he wanted to see.
Which is how he fell for the famous Cottingley Fairies hoax, where two young girls faked photos using cardboard cutouts.
Yes. The girls later confessed they hadn't even bargained for the profound, deep-seated adult desire to be fooled. Conan Doyle's highly developed intellect didn't make him less susceptible to paranormal hoaxes. It made him vastly more skilled at rationalizing the impossible.
So, motivated reasoning is the purposeful defense of belief. The other side of the cognitive coin is our reliance on heuristics, the mental shortcuts we use every day.
And critically, the high IQ individual is just as, if not more, vulnerable to these rapid intuitive biases. Let's take anchoring.
Anchoring, where an arbitrary starting value influences our final estimate.
Precisely. In one famous experiment, researchers had people spin a wheel of fortune that was rigged to land on either 10 or 65. They were then asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the UN. Those who landed on 65 consistently gave a higher estimate than those who landed on 10. The irrelevant number anchored their entire logical process.
Then there is the availability heuristic, where we judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily it comes to mind.
Yes, we consistently overestimate the risk of vivid emotive events like plane crashes because they are intensely publicized. We significantly underestimate the far greater but less dramatic risk of fatal car accidents.
And the framing effect, where the language used to describe a situation changes our perception of the facts.
This is one of the clearest demonstrations of disrationalia. Imagine a medical treatment that can be described in two ways. 1/3 of patients will succeed, or 400 people will die. Even though the logical outcome is identical, people are far more likely to accept the treatment when it's framed in terms of success or gain. Their analytical brain knows the numbers are the same, but the framing triggers an emotional response that bypasses deep analysis.
Which, of course, ties directly back to the sunk cost fallacy, where, like Edison, we continue to invest in a failing venture because of our reluctance to abandon the effort we've already committed.
These heuristics are efficient, but they short-circuit the critical thinking process entirely, regardless of our raw IQ score.
That's fascinating. But here's where it gets really interesting. The expert trap. We assume specialized knowledge inoculates against these biases, but the source material suggests the opposite, that expertise might actually amplify the bias. How does that work?
Experts operate by relying on intuitive gist, or mental schemas, built from decades of experience. A chess master doesn't calculate every move. They recognize patterns instantly. This intuitive System 1 processing is incredibly efficient, but it creates a dangerous vulnerability.
A vulnerability to what?
To contextual factors and expectation. Once the intuitive gist sets in, the expert tends to use their superior analytical skills merely to confirm that initial intuition. The very training that makes them expert, the ability to leap from evidence to conclusion quickly, may have reduced their overall rationality quotient because they rarely practice self-critique.
That sounds like a system perfectly designed for confirmation bias to run rampant.
It is. And the 2004 Brandon Mayfield fingerprint disaster provides the starkest proof of this failure. The FBI's world-class fingerprint examiners misidentified Mayfield, an American lawyer, as the person responsible for the Madrid train bombing. The failure was not due to a lack of skill. It was due to the way their expertise amplified their biases.
Could you walk us through that? How did their training become a liability?
It began with circular reasoning. The initial examination team found 15 points of similarity between the print and Mayfield's file. Critically, once their initial hunch settled on Mayfield, they began ignoring or dismissing points of interest that disagreed with the match. They were looking for confirmation, not objective truth.
And this error didn't stay contained with the first analyst.
No. This created a bias cascade. Subsequent examiners who were brought in for supposedly independent verification were informed of their colleagues' conclusions. That contextual information irrationally swayed their own judgment.
And to make matters worse, external, irrelevant details strengthened that bias.
Exactly. The examiners were also aware of external contextual information. Mayfield was a practicing Muslim who had previously represented a client in a terrorism-related case. That fact, completely irrelevant to the fingerprint lines themselves, colored the perception of the evidence. It provided a powerful emotional narrative.
And the ultimate sign of the intelligence trap overconfidence.
The FBI disregarded the Spanish National Police, who had failed to verify the match. Their internal communications were filled with extreme confidence, no doubt about it, demonstrating profound overconfidence. This case showed that excellent analysts using correct methods can still make devastating mistakes because their professional context amplifies the cognitive errors they should be preventing. The most dangerous state of expertise is certainty.
So if intelligence and expertise are the problem, what is the solution? How do we cultivate wiser decision-making? The book turns to history, setting up Benjamin Franklin as the wise ideal.
Franklin, unlike Edison, was described as allergic to anything smacking of dogma. He perfectly embodied intellectual humility. He often stated that he was apt to doubt my own judgment and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. This wasn't fake modesty. It was a carefully cultivated intellectual stance.
And he used this publicly, right, during the intense debates at the Constitutional Convention.
Absolutely. Franklin famously addressed the often stubborn delegates, urging them to doubt a little of his own infallibility. He was asking them to recognize that their own fallibility was the path to necessary consensus and wisdom.
This intellectual humility is the foundation of evidence-based wisdom, pioneered by researchers like Igor Grossman. What are the key metacognitive components he identified?
Grossman's research identifies several key dimensions. Two are essential. First, intellectual humility, which is simply the willingness to admit intellectual limitations.
So when presented with a dilemma, a wise person doesn't jump to a conclusion. They first state what information is missing.
Exactly. The second, and perhaps most vital, is actively open-minded thinking, or AOMT. This is the capacity not just to tolerate, but to actively look for and absorb information that contradicts your initial views. AOMT is the antithesis of motivated reasoning.
These qualities must be paired with another critical trait that drives mental flexibility: curiosity.
Curiosity is essential as an antidote to dogmatism. Think of Richard Feynman. He famously claimed he had limited intelligence, but he had an irrepressible, almost childlike drive to understand the world. Curiosity activates the brain's dopamine system, which not only strengthens memory, but makes people relish uncertainty.
That's the key difference, isn't it? If your intelligence is tied to your identity, uncertainty feels like a threat. If your intelligence is fueled by curiosity, uncertainty feels like an exciting challenge.
Precisely. Curiosity allows evidence to seep through the protective identity compartments that fuel motivated reasoning.
But we can't just rely on innate humility and curiosity. We have to actively train the mind. The book offers powerful techniques, starting with the growth mindset.
Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset is about the foundational belief that abilities can be improved with effort. This directly combats the fixed mindset that talent is innate, which is hugely important for intelligent people. They often view a mistake not as a learning opportunity, but as a fundamental threat to their innate brilliance.
So the growth mindset encourages smart people to embrace productive struggle.
It allows them to decouple their sense of self-worth from their immediate performance. It primes the intellectual humility that Grossman identified. You realize you are a work in progress, not a fixed, infallible entity.
The second technique addresses a specific cognitive blind spot we all suffer from: the Solomon effect.
The Solomon effect is named for King Solomon, who had legendary judgment when advising others, but whose personal life was chaotic and foolish. We are incredibly wise when reasoning about other people's problems, but surprisingly foolish when facing our own.
Why does that happen?
Our own problems trigger hot, emotional processing. The stakes feel immediate, personal, and overwhelming. When advising a friend, we operate in cool, reflective mode.
So the technique of self-distancing is how we deliberately shift from hot emotional processing to cool reflection.
That's the intervention. It involves imagining watching yourself and your problem from across the room, or explaining the problem to a child. This shift reduces the emotional heat and encourages a more dispassionate, objective assessment. A short 20-minute intervention using these techniques dramatically improved marital satisfaction over a year in one study.
To truly achieve wisdom, we also have to integrate emotion back into the process, but in a regulated way. We can't dismiss intuition entirely.
No, intuition, or the gut feeling, is often a product of non-conscious experience, what neurologist Antonio Damasio called somatic markers. These non-conscious signals can be incredibly valuable.
But, like expertise, intuition is vulnerable to external contamination, a concept called affective realism.
Affective realism occurs when the brain interprets background, irrelevant emotions, like being hungry, as being relevant to the decision at hand. Your hunger might make you perceive a colleague's sound suggestion as hostile or aggressive.
So if we're going to rely on that emotional compass, we have to hone it.
Wiser decision-making requires training three aspects: interoception, sensing internal bodily changes; emotional differentiation, using nuanced language to distinguish feelings; and regulation, managing those emotions.
And what are the practical cognitive tools that research has shown can effectively debias our emotional decisions?
First, mindfulness. Just 15 minutes of mindfulness practice was shown to reduce the sunk cost bias by a remarkable 34%. By observing emotional signals from a detached perspective, you can separate the hot feeling of regret from the cool logic of cutting your losses.
Second, the truly surprising phenomenon known as the foreign language effect.
When making decisions in a second language, decision biases like framing effects are significantly reduced. The theory is that when we process information in a foreign tongue, the emotional content is less likely to move the body. We are forced to assess the literal facts in a more analytical way.
This suggests that if we can simply build a reflective pause into our process, a momentary delay between the intuitive answer and the final decision, we can correct for biases.
That was validated in clinical settings. Researchers found that telling doctors to revisit their initial intuitive hypothesis, or simply note their gut reaction first and then analytically review the evidence, boosted diagnostic accuracy by up to 40%.
The new pinnacle of expertise, then, isn't rapid unconscious competence, but reflective competence.
It is the expert knowing when to distrust their expertise.
The individual solutions are compelling, but most major decisions happen in groups. We have to consider how the intelligence trap operates organizationally.
That brings us to the irony of collective intelligence. Studies show that the overall intelligence of a group is not strongly correlated with the average, or even the highest, individual IQ within the group.
So what predicts it?
The two main predictors are equal participation among members and the social sensitivity of the members. Put simply, how well the team listens to each other matters far more than how smart the smartest person is.
But when you staff a team with nothing but high performers or stars, things can go wrong quickly. This is the too much talent effect.
The research shows that once a group passes a certain threshold of star players, egos and status conflicts begin to interfere with information sharing and cooperation, dragging performance down. Psychological safety evaporates.
The sports analogy is perfect here. The highly paid team of individual superstars often loses to the underdog team built on teamwork.
The definitive example is England's shocking defeat by Iceland in the 2016 European Championship. England was packed with wealthy superstars. Iceland's coach was a part-time dentist. England's loss wasn't due to a lack of individual skill. It was attributed to the stars' ego and a failure to share tactical information openly. The individual intelligence trap scaled up to the collective.
And in a high-stakes hierarchical setting, blindly following authority can literally kill.
Analysis of Himalayan expeditions showed that teams from cultures that strictly respected hierarchy were more likely to reach the summit, but they were also exponentially more likely to lose members. Coordination without critical input is fragile.
So the solution is not to eliminate talent, but to introduce intellectual humility into the leadership structure.
Exactly. Leaders who model intellectual humility increase team information sharing, collaboration, and even organizational profits. By being willing to admit their own limitations, they create psychological safety, where truth can override ego.
But what happens when the entire organizational culture actively discourages critical thinking? This is the concept of functional stupidity.
Functional stupidity is where organizational cultures actively enforce conformity to maintain short-term efficiency and avoid conflict. People in the organization know better, but they turn off their critical capacities because being the troublemaker hurts their individual prospects.
The downfall of Nokia is the cautionary tale here.
Their failure wasn't due to a lack of innovation. Nokia's engineers knew the technological risks. The problem was systemic fear. Senior managers created a threat-filled environment by shouting down dissent, making employees feel their head was on the block if they delivered bad news. Consequently, employees massaged data and feigned expertise.
This shows how, when under pressure, a brilliant company can act exactly like a single, dogmatic, high-ego individual. And the consequences are tragic, especially when combined with the outcome bias.
The outcome bias is the tendency for organizations to judge decisions solely by their outcomes, entirely ignoring the risks inherent in the process. The Deepwater Horizon disaster is the ultimate illustration of this.
That catastrophe was the result of organizational malfunction stretching over decades, right?
Absolutely. The fatal blowout was preceded by dozens of ignored near misses. Because they weren't fatal, the organization ignored the underlying systemic flaws and kept cutting corners. On the day of the disaster, the team chose cheaper cement and ignored multiple anomalous pressure test results, all under extreme time pressure that eliminated any reflective thinking.
They talked themselves into believing the seal was secure simply because they had gotten away with it so many times before.
It was a collective blind spot across multiple highly intelligent companies. The solution, therefore, is designing for a collective mindfulness.
So what are the principles of collective mindfulness that organizations must implement to become high-reliability organizations?
First, they must actively encourage dissent. Second, they must reward error correction. This means instituting robust near-miss reporting systems where failure to report a mistake is punished, but reporting the mistake is praised.
And using predictive analysis tools like premortems.
Yes, a premortem is where the team imagines right at the start of a project that it has already failed catastrophically and then works backward to identify the causes. This counters both motivated reasoning and overconfidence.
And the U.S. nuclear power industry's INPO model seems to be a real-world success story here.
ENPO maximizes information sharing and outside perspective, reducing the unacknowledged errors that plague insular organizations like Nokia. The underlying goal is cultivating a collective growth mindset.
So what does this entire deep dive mean for us right now, particularly in our current climate of information overload and deep polarization? How does the intelligence trap affect our ability to deal with misinformation?
The intelligence trap directly affects us because, as cognitive misers, we rely on cues of fluency, ease of processing, and familiarity, repetition, to determine truthiness, often bypassing logical analysis entirely.
I recall the book's classic example, the Moses Ark question. How many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? Most intelligent people focus on the quantity of animals because the phrasing is fluent and fits their schema of old guy with a boat in the Bible.
And even highly intelligent university students often miss the fact that it was Noah, not Moses. The fluency of the sentence makes the fundamental error invisible. This flaw is easily manipulated. Researchers showed that adding an irrelevant, high-quality photograph of singer Nick Cave made people more likely to believe a false statement about him, simply because the image made the statement feel more fluent.
And the most pervasive, dangerous mechanism of misinformation is simple repetition. Traditional fact-checking and myth-busting campaigns often backfire spectacularly.
They backfire because by repeating the misconception, for example, listing vaccine myths in bold headlines, they increase its fluency and familiarity in the public consciousness, inadvertently reinforcing the false claim in memory.
So the solution requires specific, intentional training in critical thinking.
That training focuses on two key strategies: inoculation and reflection. Inoculation theory involves exposing people to weak examples of fallacious arguments. It's like a cognitive vaccine. It builds a mental resistance to stronger fake news later, regardless of political ideology.
It installs little alarm bells in the mind.
Exactly. And reflection is measured by the Cognitive Reflection Test, or CRT. The CRT measures the analytical mindset, the disposition needed to challenge tempting but incorrect intuitive answers.
So it tests the willingness to override that obvious System 1 lure.
Right. And higher CRT scores predict significantly lower belief in both conspiracy theories and what the source material aptly calls pseudo-profound bullshit, vague, spiritual social media posts, because they resist the fluency of the easy answer.
So what does this all mean for us? The intelligence trap is a universal warning, applicable to the highly educated and the merely curious alike.
It is. The accelerating half-life of knowledge, now just 5 years for many professions, means relying solely on past intelligence and fixed expertise is a recipe for catastrophic failure. The book's final provocation is that the qualities that prevent the intelligence trap, humility, curiosity, active open-minded thinking, and emotional regulation, are not fixed traits. They can be trained, practiced, and integrated into our daily processes.
The true mission for the future is not to acquire more raw data or higher degrees, but to ensure we apply the immense knowledge we already possess with greater wisdom and precision. We have the capability to be smart, but we must consciously choose to be wise.
That choice requires us to maintain a healthy suspicion of our own certainty, to actively look for information that contradicts our identity, and to learn to love the productive struggle of complexity. The ultimate objective is to look past the irrelevant details that create truthiness and be willing to admit that our identity is not dependent on being right about any one issue.
And perhaps the most practical takeaway is Benjamin Franklin's simple technique. Doubt a little of your own infallibility. That simple gesture can unlock profound wisdom regardless of your IQ score.
It is the ultimate countermeasure against the hubris of high intellect.
To explore this book visually, viewers can watch the mini explainer linked in the YouTube description. More long-form analyses are available in the Crisis and Perception Deep Dives playlist. If you'd like to support this educational work, you can join our Patreon community at
Patreon.com/crisis perception.